Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental in AI right now.
Yeah, how we actually figure out if these large language models, these LLMs, are any good.
Exactly. How do we measure progress? We've got some, well, I think really interesting material here that kind of challenges the status quo.
It does. It really questions the standard ways we've been doing things.
So our goal today is to give you a good, clear picture of why maybe the old benchmarks aren't cutting it anymore.
And what the alternatives might look like, these sort of more human-focused ideas.
Right. We'll touch on that LLaMA drama from last year.
Oh, yeah.
The general problems with benchmarks like MMLU, HumanEval, that kind of thing. And then dig into these newer ideas for evaluation. Should be good.
Okay, let's jump in. It's interesting, we've relied on these benchmarks for quite a while.
Yeah, they've been the yardstick, haven't they?
Pretty much. MMLU for, general knowledge, HumanEval for code.
Math for math problems, obviously.
Right. And they definitely served a purpose. They helped track things, compare models early on.
But the sources we're looking at suggest they're getting a bit shaky.
Increasingly questionable, yeah. Their effectiveness is really being debated.
And that whole LLaMA drama back in April 25, that really threw a spotlight on the vulnerabilities, didn't it?
It absolutely did. So you had Meta's LLaMA 4 Maverick model.
Right.
Hitting the top spot on LLaMA. And LLaMA uses human feedback, right? People chatting with the bots.
Yeah, which sounds pretty robust on the surface.
Yeah.
But then the story got complicated.
It did. Because it came out that the version they submitted to LLaMA, well, it wasn't the same one they released publicly. It was an experimental version.
Ah, okay, so straight away, transparency issues.
Big time. Is that score really representative? And then you get the accusations of, benchmark hacking.
Meaning they tuned it just for that test.
Potentially. Or maybe tweaking it after training specifically to boost scores in that environment. It raises questions.
And that ties into this whole other problem. Data contamination. That sounds bad.
It's a major worry. Think about it. These LLMs are trained on just unbelievable amounts of text and code from the internet.
Right. Scrape from everywhere.
So the chance that some of the actual benchmark questions or stuff very similar to them ends up in the training data, it's pretty high.
Okay, so it's like the student peeking at the exam paper beforehand.
Exactly. So if the model scores highly, is it genuine understanding or is it just remembering something it saw during training?
Right, just recall. It doesn't mean it can apply that knowledge somewhere new.
Precisely. So that LLaMA situation, while specific, it kind of showed how fragile these rankings can be.
LLaMA even put out a statement, didn't they? About needing clearer rules and fairer setups.
They did. But like you said, the problems go way beyond just one model or one incident.
So what are the other big limitations the sources point out?
Well, beyond the data contamination, there's benchmark overfitting and saturation.
Overfitting, like getting really good at the test, but not much else.
Yeah, exactly. The model optimizes so hard for that specific benchmark that its skills don't really generalize. It might ace the multiple choice test.
But struggle with a real-world problem that's more open-ended.
Right. And saturation is when the models just get too good for the test. Lots of models start hitting near perfect scores.
So the benchmark stops being useful for telling them apart.
Yeah.
Like everyone getting 100% on a simple quiz.
Precisely. It loses its discriminatory power.
Okay, what else?
Well, a lot of benchmarks have a really narrow focus. They test isolated skills,
But like just code completion or just answering factual trivia?
Yeah, but real life isn't like that. It's complex, it's messy. A model great at a coding task might totally fail at understanding what a user actually wants it to do with that code.
Or handling errors gracefully.
Exactly. And then there's the lack of robustness testing.
Meaning
They often don't test the models with, say, slightly corrupted input or noisy data.
Okay.
Or prompts that are deliberately designed to trick or mislead the model. These are called adversarial inputs.
So not really stress testing them under realistic, imperfect conditions.
Not nearly enough. And maybe the biggest gap is that these quantitative benchmarks, they just ignore the qualitative stuff. Like, is the model actually aligned with human values? Is it fair? Does it show any kind of understanding or empathy? What's the user experience like? Is it trustworthy?
Right. A model could give factually correct answers, but be completely useless if it's biased or rude or just impossible to interact with.
Totally. And these things are becoming super important as we use these models more and more.
And it's not just the quality of the output, is it? What about just like practical stuff?
The operational blind spots. Yeah, that's another big
What
one.
does that cover?
Things like speed latency, how quickly does it respond? Throughput, how many requests can it handle at once?
Resource consumption, how much computing power does it need?
Yeah, and stability, does it crash? A model might top the leaderboards but be totally unusable in practice if it's incredibly slow or needs a supercomputer to run.
Okay, so just relying on those traditional scores gives you a very, very incomplete picture.
Pretty much, yeah. A very limited view of what the model can actually do and how well it works in the real world.
It's like judging a car only by its 0 to 60 time, ignoring fuel economy, safety, comfort.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
Okay, so if the old ways are insufficient, what's the path forward? It sounds like this idea of human-centric benchmarks is gaining traction.
That's right. The interesting proposal is to add 4 new dimensions for evaluation. And the key here is they're meant to complement the existing metrics, not totally replace them.
Okay, so adding layers, not throwing everything out. What are the 4?
They're suggesting aspirations, emotions, thoughts, and interaction.
Aspirations, emotions, thoughts, interaction. Intriguing categories. Let's break them down. Aspirations first. What's that about? Values.
Exactly. It goes beyond just basic safety filters, like not generating harmful content. It's about assessing how well the LLM aligns with deeper human values. Fairness, honesty, respect, that kind of thing.
Okay, how do you measure that?
Well, it breaks down into a few areas. First, ethical reasoning. Can the model grapple with complex ethical dilemmas?
Like, not just give an answer, but explain why, based on some ethical framework.
Precisely. Then there's bias mitigation, ensuring fairness across different demographic groups. Tools like StereoSet can help detect some biases.
But we need more nuanced testing for real situations.
Definitely. And then truthfulness. This is huge. How reliable is it? Does it avoid making stuff up hallucinations?
Does it admit when it doesn't know? Can it correct itself?
Yes. Truthful QA is mentioned as one benchmark starting to look at this. And finally, accountability and transparency.
Can it explain its reasoning, even simply? Can its decisions be audited? Can it learn from feedback?
Right. So assessing aspirations isn't just about right or wrong answers. It's about the principles, the process, and that often needs human judgment.
Makes total sense. Okay, dimension 2. Emotions. Wow, that seems tricky for a machine.
It is. It really is. But think about how we're starting to use LLMs as companions, tutors in customer service.
Yeah, roles where understanding emotion is kind of critical.
Exactly. So this dimension looks at things like emotional recognition. Can the model pick up on subtle emotions in the text? Maybe even voice tone down the line.
Beyond just positive, negative sentiment.
Much beyond. Then, empathetic response. Does it react in a way that feels supportive, understanding, crucially, without being manipulative?
That's a fine line.
It is. Also, perspective taking, can it grasp the user's viewpoint? And appropriateness, tailoring its emotional tone to the context. Professional versus personal, for example.
Okay, I see the importance. But how on earth do you measure empathy in an AI?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Developing hard metrics is tough. The sources suggest using simulated scenarios.
Like give it a prompt where a user expresses frustration.
Yeah, exactly. And then have human raters evaluate the AI's response. Did it seem empathetic? Was it helpful? It's more qualitative, for sure.
But maybe necessary for these more subtle
It
qualities.
seems like it, yeah.
Okay, third dimension. Thoughts. What kind of thinking are we talking about here, beyond just facts?
This is about digging into deeper reasoning, intellectual sharpness, flexibility, stuff that goes beyond simple pattern matching.
Like what specifically?
Well, multi-step reasoning is a big one. Can the model break down a complex problem? Can it show its work, so to speak? Maybe using techniques like chain of thought.
Following a logical sequence?
Right. Then, logical inference. Can it handle deduction, induction, abduction? Especially with incomplete information.
Thinking like a detective almost.
Sort of, yeah. And abstract thinking and creativity. Can it grasp abstract concepts, generate genuinely new ideas, solve problems laterally?
That's a high bar.
It is. And finally, something called metacognition, basically knowing what it knows.
Recognizing ambiguity. Knowing its own limits.
Exactly. Identifying flawed premises in a question, for instance.
So how do you test that? Sounds harder than multiple choice.
It is. It requires more complex tasks. Logic puzzles, maybe. Creative prompts where humans judge the novelty and insight. Analyzing the actual reasoning steps, not just the final answer.
Right, looking under the hood at the process.
Oh, got it.
Okay, final dimension. Interaction. This sounds like it's all about the user experience.
Pretty much. A model could be brilliant, but if it's a nightmare to interact with, its usefulness plummets. Right?
Absolutely. So what goes into good interaction?
Several things. Coherence and relevance. Does the conversation make sense? Does it stay on topic? Does it actually answer the question asked?
Basic stuff, but crucial.
Crucial. Naturalness and fluency. Does it sound like a human or like a robot reading a script? Is it engaging?
Context maintenance is probably important too.
Huge. Can it remember what you talked about 5 minutes ago and use that information?
Nothing worse than having to repeat yourself constantly.
Tell me about it. Then, adaptability and repair. How does it handle interruptions if you change the subject? If your query is a bit ambiguous, can it recover if it misunderstands something?
Graceful recovery, yeah.
And finally, just general usability and guidance. Is it intuitive? Does it offer helpful suggestions? How does it handle errors?
So basically, does it feel like a smooth, productive, maybe even pleasant conversation?
That's the goal. And evaluating this dimension, it really leans heavily on human judgment.
Makes sense. You'd need people to rate things like task success, satisfaction, efficiency, helpfulness.
Exactly, those kinds of things.
Okay, so these four new dimensions, aspirations, emotions, thoughts, interaction, they paint a much richer picture of what makes an LLM good, beyond just benchmark scores.
A much more holistic view, yeah. One that's more aligned with how these things will actually impact us.
But I mean, actually implementing these kinds of evaluations, it sounds challenging.
Oh, definitely. There are real hurdles. Subjectivity is a big one, especially for things like emotions or aspirations.
How do you get consistent ratings?
Good question. And it takes significant time and resources. You need trained human evaluators.
It's not as cheap and scalable as just running an automated test.
Not at all. And developing protocols that are standardized enough to be reliable, but flexible enough to capture nuance, that's a major research challenge. It needs people from computer science, psychology, linguistics, HCI, all working together.
And the goalposts keep moving, right? As models get better, the tests need to get harder or change focus.
Absolutely. Evaluation can't be static. It has to be dynamic, adapting to new capabilities, new ways models might fail. We need to move towards more realistic, interactive testing, maybe even adversarial testing becoming standard.
That llama drama really is a good reminder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Topping a leaderboard on a narrow test doesn't mean the AI is trustworthy or truly beneficial.
Not necessarily, no. It's a piece of the puzzle, but far from the whole picture.
So the ultimate aim here isn't just faster, bigger models.
No. It's about guiding development towards AI that's wiser, maybe, more responsible, more collaborative, better partners for us.
That's a much more ambitious goal.
It is, but arguably the necessary one. Adopting this kind of holistic evaluation, considering what they know, how they reason, how they interact, their values, that's how we steer AI towards genuinely benefiting society.
Wow, okay. This has been a really clarifying deep dive. So just to recap quickly, the old benchmarks have serious limitations: data contamination, overfitting, narrow focus, ignoring qualitative stuff.
Right, and the operational side, too.
Right. And the proposed way forward involves adding these human-centric layers: aspirations, emotions, thoughts, and interaction.
Looking at the whole picture.
It really highlights how much our definition of good AI is evolving. It's not just about performance anymore.
It's also about responsibility, usability, alignment.
And it's crucial to remember, like you said, these new ideas complement the old ones. We still need quantitative measures.
Yeah, it's about building a more complete toolkit for evaluation, not just swapping one set of tools for another. They should work together.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. As we develop and adopt these more complex, human-centric ways of evaluating AI, what impact do you think that will have? How might it change the kind of AI that gets built and deployed? And looking ahead, what aspects of AI behavior do you personally think are the most critical ones we need to get right as these systems become, woven into the fabric of our lives? Definitely something worth thinking about.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us.